So at this moment, we find ourselves caught in a perfect storm. And welcome to Seaman's Watch. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about that perfect storm and giving you some pointers for how you can survive the storm and what role you can play that will allow you to make things better for yourself and for other people. So let's jump right in. So we are experiencing right now multiple crises that have come together and produced an effect that is much larger than what any one of these crises would do. And so I just want to talk about that process and think about how all of these forces have come together to create the situation that we're in now. The first piece of this storm is really the pandemic itself, and so the pandemic is at the heart of a lot of turmoil and upheaval that we have experienced. We could have prepared for this. Bill Gates gave a famous talk in 2015, and he was predicting a super virus that could sweep the world and take out a significant number of people. And he basically outlined some steps that could be taken that that people were pretty much focused on other things, and so they ignored him. And pretty much the worst case scenario, or at least close to it, has come to pass. And I believe that the pandemic is the first of a series of pandemics that we're going to have to face and resolve. But now that the wake up call has been posted, I think we're going to be much better prepared for the next pandemic wave that we are going to experience. So I predict that the future pandemics are going to have less of an impact. At least that's my hope. But the reality is, the pandemic has created a global catastrophe. There is no country on earth that hasn't been deeply affected, either directly by the disease taking hold and sweeping through, or certainly indirectly by the whole world shutting down for a whole year. So the death toll now is reaching 2.7 million people have died from this pandemic, which puts it pretty high on the scale of world events that cause a significant death toll. 5.4 million of those people were Americans. So you can see that, or I'm sorry, that's not correct. That was supposed to be 0.54 million, 540,000 Americans have been affected, have died from the pandemic. And that is more Americans than we've lost in all the wars over the last 150 years combined. So this is a pretty significant event in our national history as well. We couple this with the looming social crisis. We've seen a rise of nationalism, not only in the United States, but in many countries in the world, that thoughts of extremism and propensity toward violence have really gripped a lot of the world in this time. And then we've seen the rise of cyber attacks and trying to control public opinion, trying to control awareness and get people to think certain things and act in certain ways. And that all these things together have created a sort of a social breakdown that we have experienced. And issues like racism and xenophobia are kind of at a high of we've gone back many decades in terms of the way that people are treating one another in our society right now. So that's really created a social crisis for us. And then we move on to the government, and we see, the government has been impacted in some very serious ways, including election tampering, and just the function of government has really broken down to where we have two parties that are at all out war with each other, trying to get their way instead of trying to do what's right for the populace. And then in this environment, there is a significant increase in the amount of propaganda and misinformation and all-out lies trying to manipulate outcomes of certain things. And so this has really created a state of crisis in our government, and so that's part of the perfect storm that has come upon us. And then with the pandemic, we've had a lot of job loss, a lot of businesses have failed, and we're starting to see that manifest in terms of hunger and in terms of people being behind on their mortgages, and the government is working hard to try to protect people in their housing situation so that they're not evicted and that people can eat. And so there's been a lot of effort recently in trying to address these issues. But overall, there's been a dramatic increase in poverty just in the last year. And so this is something that we're going to have to address as a people. We're going to have to address it as a nation. And even in the bigger picture, we're going to have to address this on the global stage as well. And then that leads us to the additional problem of the environment. We clearly know that climate change is a real deal. Of the 10 largest forest fires in Colorado, is the state where I live, that 3 of those were in the last year. And I didn't just check that statistic, but I think I remember that properly. But at any rate, we're seeing record fires that far exceed anything that we've been looking at before. And then we see an increase in dramatic storms, floods, and the most alarming thing out of the environmental picture is that the scientists that have been telling us for years that the Earth is warming up, that they're now coming out and saying, oh, our predictions were way too optimistic, and that the crisis is coming on sooner rather than later. And so we find ourselves in that storm as well. So we have experienced a sense of deep trauma as a nation, as a people, our social identity, all of those things are now impacted by these world events. And so we're all struggling to figure out, well, what do we do and how do we get through this? I was trained as an engineer, and one of the classes I took was called Strengths of Materials. And in that class, we had the opportunity to take these cylinders about 18 inches high of concrete and put them in this giant machine that put a tremendous amount of stress on the pillar of concrete until it broke. And so stress was defined as the pressure that gets applied to the object, and then strain is the catastrophic failure of when that thing finally snaps. So if you imagine taking something soft like an orange and putting it in that same machine, then there's a certain amount of stress that that can be applied without destroying the orange. So it squishes up, it gets shorter in the vise. But then when you take the stress off, the orange might not have been strained up to a certain point. But if you put a lot of extra pressure on that, then you apply too much stress, then you get the strain that the orange just collapses and you have a bunch of juice. And so I like to think about that as a model for the kind of stress that we experience in our everyday life. There's a certain amount of stress that we can experience without having a catastrophic failure. And if we're a rigid body like the concrete, and you apply too much stress, then there's catastrophic failure. But if you're a very resilient body, like imagine a rubber ball, you could apply quite a bit of stress and then you're not going to get the same strain. So that's kind of the way I think about with these social conditions, is that we can weather a certain amount of stress without being strained. But when that stress gets too great, then it's going to exceed our resiliency and we can't pop back into the same shape that we started with. So dramatic stress can cause traumatic strain. And we see this in our society. It's my belief, I don't really have the numbers on this, but it's my belief that mental health has declined significantly in the last year. In mental health as measured by suicide, substance abuse, domestic violence, social violence, hate crimes, all that stuff. I think that there's a very high likelihood that all that stuff has been subject to strain, that the stress has been so great that people are to the breaking point. And in fact, we can see that in society as a whole. There's a real social breakdown that's happening right now. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit later in this talk, is I want to give some pointers for how we can reduce the amount of strain that we're experiencing. So the first area where we're under threat of strain is just how we think, and the evolution of the phone and the internet structure that goes along with that has literally changed how humans think. We've seen more change in the way that humans think in the last 10 years than we probably have in the last 50 years with television and radio and all that other stuff. So the impact on our daily lives, how we get information, how we share information, how we communicate with one another, how we build relationships, we are fundamentally different than we were 10 years ago. And for the youngest generation, they have never known the pre-internet world. And so they have no other way of thinking other than looking at their phone and getting all of their truth right from their phone and whatever information sources they're following at that point. So this has created a certain kind of crisis in that we no longer think independently. We now think as a collective based on the information that is being broadcast to us on the internet. And so right now there is a confidence crisis. We don't know who to trust. And there's so much misinformation and so much information with bad intent to deceive, that it has created a real crisis in beliefs and just this idea of we just don't really trust anybody anymore. And then you couple in with that the emotional content of our lives are just dominated by social media and by the interactions that are fueled off of the social media. And it is designed to be addictive, and we are absolutely hooked. If you're involved in modern society at all, you are probably addicted to this stuff and can't put down your phone because of the hook that it has on you. So heavy internet usage is directly linked in a lot of studies now to a decline in mental health. And so because our we're not limiting our social media consumption and how we operate with social media, it has sort of pushed us in the direction of extremism, because the media itself amplifies extremism and gives voice to the loudest among us. And then as a consequence, our relationships have really taken a hit. Social distancing has basically said that there's a health concern with getting within breathing distance of other people, and so this has created a kind of at least disconnection. And then you put on top of that the political alienation, and people are feeling extremely isolated these days. And I think that most people I know that I talk to are just fatigued from all of the extremism. And again, we no longer know who to trust. In fact, most of us trust people a lot less than we did a couple of years ago. And so this is a crisis we are going to have to address if we're going to pull through. And then this has also revealed, all of these crises coming together have also revealed how broken our institutions are. And I would argue that all four of these instances represent institutional structures that just don't work nearly as well as they did. And in many cases, these structures have been broken for probably the last 10 years and not working very well. But the pandemic has just brought how broken these things are to the forefront. So it's time that we really take a look at our institutions and begin to address them. So I want to talk through the 4 different stages of recovery. The first one is just to get to a place of survival. We got to get through the immediate crisis. And for me, that looks primarily like getting the vaccines and getting everybody vaccinated, and then we've addressed the health crisis, making sure that people have food to eat, and making sure that the schools are reopening and that we get back to a normal semblance of family life, and until the schools can be fully operational and safe, then we're not really surviving until we can get that fixed. And so that's our first goal, is just to get to a survival level. The second goal is to get to a level where these crises are managed in a sustainable way. And so if we don't address the sustainability issues, then we're going to bounce back into more of a survival level thing. But once we get the first step of survivability, then we have to address the jobs, and we have to address how legislation happens, how laws get passed, and how government is managed. We have to get back to a state where the government is actually working for us instead of against us. And this is really bringing us all back to a place of unity that's focused on common good. So right now, the political discussion is about who's going to win, and the winner takes all. So it's not about common good. Special interests still have a lock on the minds of our leaders, and we've got to address this. We've got to get back to a unity faith based on common good, and where everybody gets to prosper all at once. And then for sustainability on the environmental side, we really have to start a significant investment in research around clean energy. Without this, we have no ability to the climate crisis will come and grip us by the neck. And so we can't allow that to happen. We need to begin working on it now, because there is a point at which the world will not sustain human life on the surface. So we've got to address those issues before they come to create mass starvation and things like that. And then what we really want is to improve the overall system so that it functions better than it has in maybe 50 years. So the real improvement that we need to address has to be systemic and deep, and go far beyond the sustainable level. And ultimately, this has to be based on the reformation of the government itself, and how we can fix the government dysfunctions like gerrymandering and voter suppression and things like that. We must address these issues in order to have a healthy government once again. And then we really need to make education more available to all people and not just the rich. And we need to make healthcare available for all people and not just the rich. And consequently, we are at a place in wealth gap, in inequality in wealth, that we have never been at for the last, it's been over 100 years since we've been at a place that was as lopsided as it is right now. So we must address this to have any long-term positive impact. And then finally, what we really want to do is optimize the entire system and to lock in those gains. And so this is going to mean global alliances. It's going to mean a different ethic of social responsibility. And ultimately, this is somewhat tied to the whole way of how we use technology. Right now, our technology is killing us, and we've got to get to a place where we have healthy limits on our technology itself. This means invoking laws around privacy. It means holding our social media services responsible for doing the right thing socially. And it means just retooling our whole understanding of how technology fits into people's lives. And then ultimately, we just really want to invest in people. So any government expenses or government programs that help people is really where we should be focused. And historically, over the last 50 years, it's been all around business. And there's a belief that that business is the business of the United States. And so we've given an inordinate amount of resources into the hands of our corporate leaders. And it's time that the people actually benefit in this next wave in order to create a society that's more just and more fair for more people. So here's my survival guide. Start with yourself. Start with your understanding of what needs to be fixed in your own life. They tell you on the airplane to put on your own oxygen mask before you mess with anybody else, and I think that's good advice here. Look at your future, look at your health, wealth, and wisdom, and invest in that. And the most important area you can invest right now is most likely to be in the mental health area. Take care of yourself, give yourself grace, and get through this with the resources and resolve that you will need going forward. Then help your neighbor. If you're okay, then serve your neighbor. Help your community figure out how you can be a part of a community renaissance, and and then reestablish contact with other people. Try to restore those broken relationships. And then ultimately, we want to hold our leaders accountable. They have not done a very good job for us over the last few years. And we really want to make sure that they hear the voice of the people and begin doing the right things. And then build bridges, not walls. This is a time to restore relationship, not starting new battles. So be the change you wish to see. Work for the good of everyone, and try to put your own self-interest in the background so that you can respond to the needs and demands that your society is asking of you. And this is going to require that you have to overcome your own prejudice. All of us have prejudices, and all of us want to succeed and are willing to compromise on the success of others in order to benefit. And we just have to come to grips with that. We have to be humble enough to admit that we have prejudices, and then we have to choose to forgive those that have stepped on our particular prejudices. And I just want to leave you with this one thought. And this is something that I pretty much, every presentation, every time I talk to people, has become the anchor thought, is that you can't do everything, but everyone can do something. There is no one out there that can't do anything that is prevented from making a contribution. So be practical, act simply, act soon, and then act repeatedly over and over again. Each day, try to do something small, but try to do something positive. And with that, I'm going to leave you, and thank you.